We begin today the Gemara, the last two words, and Daf Ayin Tes Amud Beis, where it says Omar Rava. So this is a continuation where the Gemara here is explaining the Mishnah. The Mishnah here in the middle of Ayin Tes Amud Beis says, Ritzeach shenis'arev ba'chedim. If you have a ritzeach, a murderer, that he was mixed into a crowd of other people, so what do? So the Tanakama says they're all going to be potter. Rabbi Yehuda says in such a case, you have to put them into a kippah, into a locked room, and you allow them to die on their own. So the Gemara was wondering what's the pshat in this machlokes, what case that they're arguing about. It seemingly cannot, or clearly cannot be a case where a murderer is mixed with a crowd of just kosher yidden. In such a case, it's not necessary to say potter, and there's no way Rabbi Yehuda would say that you put them into a one room and they all are left to die. They're kosher yidden. So the Gemara brought two pshat, and one pshat was that it's talking about all ratzchim. They're all murderers. So what does it mean they got mixed? There's one person that there was a gemardin, there was already a verdict, and there's the others that there was not yet the final verdict, and they got mixed. And it's that case where the Tanakama says potter, and Rabbi Yehuda says that they all have to be left to die in a kippah. And another pshat, the Gemara says, a similar pshat, but not regarding human beings. The Mishnah is talking about a shoyer haniskal, an ox that gored and killed someone, and he is chayev skila misa as well. And again, similar, there's one ox that gored that there was already a final verdict that he has to be stoned to death. There's other oxen that are also wild, and they gored and killed, but they were not yet, there's no final verdict on them, and they got mixed together. And there's the same machlokes as explained between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda about this. That's the two pshatim that the Gemara brought in the Mishnah. So now on this, the Gemara brings Rava, asked a question on these pshatim. Omar Rava, so Rava said, I hochi. If this is the pshat in the Mishnah, Hainu Diktani Allah, this that we learned in a Braisa, on what it says in the Mishnah, that Omar Rabbi Yosi said, Afile Abba Chalafta b'neim. Even if my father, Chalafta, would be amongst them, then the same halacha, the same machlokes here in our Mishnah would apply. What is he saying? Whether you learn like the first pshat, like the pshat of Reish Lakish, or whether the pshat of Shmuel, whether it's talking about a ritzeach amongst other reitzchim where there was no gemar din, or if it's talking about a shoyer aniskal, where does this afila Abba Chalafta b'neim come in over here? If Abba Chalafta, if he's also like this category that they explain, which is a ritzeach, so then there's no afila. Elam, I going to say Abba Chalafta? Abba Chalafta was a great person. It's not shaykh by him to say that he's a ritzeach, so that he doesn't belong into the afilo, that it doesn't go here on what it says in the Mishnah. So this braisa makes it clear that these two pshatim that we just said is not correct. Elam Rava, so therefore Rava says the pshat is different in our Mishnah. Hachi kama. The Mishnah here is saying as follows. When it speaks about the case of one ritzeach that got mixed in with others, so the point that we thought before the pshat in the Mishnah is that we already have one person that's established as a ritzeach. And now he got mixed into a crowd. But now the Gemara says, no. The case when it says that they got mixed into a crowd, it's talking about a situation that lichatchila, it's never clear who the ritzeach is. And that is because shnayim, shoyu oimdim, there are two people that are standing, v'yatza chetzme b'neim, and an arrow was shot out from one of them. And v'harag, and it killed someone. And you don't know who shot the arrow. So over here, the iruv, the mixture, meaning the fact that we don't know, was lichatchila, that we don't know who shot the arrow. It's on this that we say that both of them are going to be potter, because you can't, you don't know who it is.
If they got mixed into a crowd.
No, they did not get mixed into a crowd. No. They did. When it says in the Mishnah, what it means is, this is what it means. It means that when there was a crowd, two people, even more than two people, and there's an arrow that was thrown, and it's a crowd, so you don't know who threw the arrow, in such a case, peturin. That's what the Tanakam over here in the Mishnah is saying. This is the case. Now on this, Rabbi Yosi, in the Braisa, Rabbi Yosi said about this, Afila Abba Chalafta b'neim. Even if it's just two people, and one of these two people is my father Chalafta, and his father was a great Amayra. He was a great person, so you could assume that who threw the arrow, the other person. But nevertheless, you can't give the other person misa because you didn't in fact see that it was him. That's what we're talking about over here. Okay, now so it's on this case. So now the Gemara goes on to say, what's the continuation of the Mishnah? But the Mishnah goes on to say that there's a machlokes. Rabbi Yehuda says, kain tzanais and lekippa. What's the continuation of the Mishnah talking about? So now the Gemara says that, like the Gemara says in other places, there's something missing here in the Mishnah, and now the continuation of the Mishnah is a different case. And what's the continuation? Like the case that the Gemara brought before. V'shar shenigmar dinoi shenis'arev b'shvarim acherim ma'alya. If you have one share that there's a Gemara din that on him that was mixed in with other shvarim. So what do? Cyclin Isam. You give them all skila. So you have one shor that gored and killed, and he's chayiv skila, and the other shvarim, the other ones that are there that he got mixed into the crowd of the other shvarim, they're not chayiv skila at all, and it got mixed in together now. So what do you do in such a case? So the Tanna Kama says, cyclin Isam. We're going to have to stone to death all of them. Why do we stone to death all of them if it's only one of them that is chayiv skila? So Rashi explains the reason is because now that it got mixed in, they're all going to be asur bahana. One of the halachis of a shoyer haniskal is that it's asur bahana. You may not have any benefit from it. And according to Rashi, that's even when it's still alive. Taisus over here, one of the details in this long Taisus that you see here, B'shar Shal Enigmar Dinai, that continues here through this most of this Amud, disagrees with this point and says that a shoyer haniskal that's asur bahana is not once it's when it's still alive. It's only when after it's put to death. But according to Rashi, the shoyer haniskal is already asur bahana even when it's still alive. So if it's asur bahana, in this case where one shoyer haniskal got mixed into a crowd of others, they're all going to become asur bahana. Because you can't say that it's going to be batal b'raiv, because we're talking about live animals. By live animals, midrabanan, there's no such a din as bittul b'raiv. So if they're anyways all asur bahana, so if you're going to kill all of these shvarim, the owner doesn't have any loss of this, because he anyways can't have any anar from it. So therefore we kill all of them, and like this you'll fulfill the mitzvah of skila that there is on that one shoyer haniskal. That's the Tanna Kama, cyclin Isam. Rabbi Yehuda says that in such a case, kainsin Isam lekipa. In such a case, we have to leave them to die, but not by doing the skila, but you bring them into a room or into a cage, and you leave them to die there. So Rashi here says that we're not going to be all of them. We're not going to be matriach the bezdin and to give skila, because you don't know that they're all chayiv skila. You can have 100 oxen, so we're not going to be matriach the bezdin to give skila to all of them. We're going to just let them die. It's not batal b'raiv, as I mentioned. At least with the Rabbanon, it's not batal b'raiv, and therefore we're not matriach bezdin, and we're not tayyib b'emes, it is batal b'raiv. But with the Rabbanon, it's not, and therefore we're not going to be matriach bezdin, and they're going to die on their own. That's the machlokes of the Tanna Kama of Yehuda. So our Mishnah is talking about two different cases, as the Gemara explains. Okay, now here the Gemara brings a braisa that shows this machlokes regarding such a kind of case. V'hotanya, and this is what we learned in a braisa. Okay, and the braisa starts off first with another point. Para shehi misa, a cow that killed someone. Nava'acha kach yolda, and afterwards it gave birth. So what's the halacha with this child that's born here? Is it also going to be asur, like the mother that gored and killed and is asur ba'ano, or has to be put to death? If this cow gave birth before there was the din taira and before there was the final verdict that it has to be stoned to death, so then vlada mutter, then the child that's born will be mutter. The Gemara will soon explain why this child is mutter. Seemingly, this child is born from a mother that gored, and the child was in the mother when it gored. So why should it be mutter? The Gemara will explain. If after there was a Gemar din on this cow that it's chayiv skila, and now it gives birth, so then vlad aser. So the vlad of this mother is going to be aser, because as the Gemara will soon explain, this is based on the klal ubar yerachimai, that a fetus, the baby that's born from this mother, is like a limb of the animal of this mother. It's like a thigh of this mother. And therefore, if there's a Gemara din on the mother that it's chayiv skila and it's asur ba'ana, the same applies to the baby that's born from this mother. Now the Braisa goes on to say, regarding the case that we're discussing over here, Nisarev ba'achedim, if this Vlad that's asur got mixed into a crowd of other cows with others.
That's the mother, right?
The mother got mixed in? Okay, the mother got, the mother. It could be either the mother or the child. Doesn't make a difference, because in this last case over here, they're both asur. So the one that's asur got mixed in with others, and then even furthermore, va'achedim ba'achedim, or then the first crowd of these cows that got mixed already once, got mixed even a second time. Now, if it got mixed even a second time, so the first time again it gets mixed in, it's one suffix. And the second time, this is what's called a svek. It's a double suffix. But nevertheless, asur. It's all going to be. Sorry, I went up a line. Kainsin aisan lekipa. So what do you do in such a case? You have to take them all into a kippah and allow them to die. This is exactly like the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. The chiddush over here, though, is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, we do this not only if it got mixed once, but even if it got mixed a second time. because Rabbi Yehuda and other places holds that we don't make a distinction between one suffix and a double suffix, a svek sveke. The same halacha applies that you're going to have to let them all die. Rabbi Lazar Rab Shimon says, like the Gemara explained before, the Tanakama, that mevi and Isan lebezdin v'cycle and Isan, that we're going to have to give skila to all of them because we want to fulfill the mitzvah of skila. Anyways, they're all going to be asur b'hana, so there's no hefsed, there's no loss to the owner, and we're going to give them all skila. So here we see clearly the machlekes in the brayse that we mentioned and explained the Mishnah the same way. Now, Omar, the Gemara goes back to what it said in the beginning of this brayse. So what did it say? The first case of the brayse. That if this cow that Gordon killed before there was a Gemar Din, it gave birth, Vlada mutter, that child born is going to be mutter. So the question on this is, why? Is it saying this even if while the cow Gordon killed it was already pregnant? But why should the child born after this be mutter? Rave said, Vlad hanoigachas. Asur, the Vlad, the baby born from a cow that gored, is going to be Asur. He uvlada. Both the mother and the child that's born are going to be Asur. Nakhu Vlad anerbas Asur. Again, 1 second. How do you read this over here? This is b'negeya to it goes together. Sorry. He uvlada nakhu. They're both going to be Asur. The Vlad of the negachas. They're both going to be asur. Why? Because he uvlada nakhu. They both gore together. The child is in the mother's womb, so therefore they're both going to be asur. Now this statement of Rave, when it says here asur, is not talking about the isser that we were talking about till now, which is the isser bahana that there is because it's chayiv miseh. He's talking about the isser of bringing it as a carbon. One of the isurim of using as a carbon is an animal that killed someone. So in this case, if it killed someone, so this animal and the baby born are going to be asur. Now Rashi points out that we're talking about over here in a case where you don't have clear two edim saying that it gored. Because if you do, then it would be asur not only for a carbon, it would be asur b'chlal, for anybody to have anah. But over here we're talking about that you have just one aid, or the person himself, the owner himself was maida that it gored, and then you can't give it the chi of skila. It's not going to be asur ba'ana for anybody, but in such a case, it'll be asur to be brought as a carbon, and it includes also the baby that was inside the mother's womb when it gored someone. Similar, vlad ha-nirbas, the baby of an animal that was nirbas, there was a relation with a human being, asur, he uvlada. So it's going to be asur both the mother and also the baby that was in the mother's womb at that time of the Aveda. Because he uvlada nerbu, both of them were part of the Aveda. And this is based on the point that mentioned before. The ubar is yarechimai. The ubar is not a separate entity in the mother's womb. It's like a limb of the mother's body. So therefore, whatever isser applies to the mother applies to the baby as well. So what's the Gemara's question? So over here as well, how can we say that you have the cow that gored and was already pregnant at the time of the goring, and yet if it gives birth afterwards, it's going to be mutter? Why is the child that if you give birth, why is it going to be mutter? Now Rashi over here adds, maybe we'll say that the child that was born was not brought to Bezdin B'chlal. The child is not here. It's just the mother that's here in the Bezdin. But that can't be. If the child is not here, so then obviously there's nothing to talk about B'chlal. So if the mother wouldn't be here also, there's no Isser on the mother. The mother is brought to Bezdin, and there's a Gemara Din on the mother, and the child is also here, and still the Braise is saying that the child is mutter. But why? The child is part of the mother's body. So the Gemara changes the pshat in the understanding of the Braise. The way you have to understand what the Braise is saying is as follows. Im ad shaloi nigmar dina. This cow that gored, before the final verdict, ibra v'yolda, it became pregnant and it gave birth. So both at the time of the goring and at the time of the verdict, it was not pregnant and it did not give birth. It was in between that it both became pregnant and gave birth. So then vlada mutter. Then the child born will be mutter. But if after the Gemar Din it became pregnant and it gave birth, then vlada aser. Then the child that's born is going to be aser, because once it's the Gemar Din, this animal is aser ba'ana, and the animal that's aser ba'ana that gives birth is also going to be aser just like the mother. That's the pshat in the Braise. Okay, what the Gemara asks on the second din that we just said, that after the Gemar Din it gave birth and it's going to be aser. fact, the Gemara, this is all good and true according to the opinion that says, Zeh v'zeh goyrem aser. When you have something that is caused from this and from this, meaning it comes from two sources, one that's permitted and one that's forbidden. And because it also has a source that's forbidden, it's going to be aser. So you can say that in this case as well. For the baby to be born, it has to be a male and a female that are mating, and there's the zera of the father of this child that's born as well. So the child is not only born from the mother, which is aser, it's also born from the male, from the father, which is not a shayr on iskal. So how could you say that the child is going to be aser when the child is born? But if you say like this mandama that says zeh v'zeh goyrem aser, that when you have the child that's born that comes from the father that's mutter, but it also comes from the mother that's aser, so then the child will be aser. So then we understand why the child is going to be aser. But the opinion that says that in a case when you have this child that's born over here, in Bechla, whenever you have something that's being caused by two sources, and so in such a case it will be mutter. How can you understand here the pshat in this braisa when it says that in this case when the animal that there was a gemar din on it became pregnant and gave birth afterwards, why should it be aser? It's zev v'zeh goyrem. And Taisus here adds that there's an additional discussion about this in other places in the Gemara regarding zera ha'av. It's not a typical case of zev v'zeh goyrem. There's the mother, and then there's also the zera of the father, the male, that brings the birth of this child. And there's a separate machlokes about that in Gemara, whether the zera ha'av is considered to be significant. So obviously, the Gemara here is asking this question according to the opinion that says that the male, that his contribution is also significant, and therefore the child should be mutter. So according to this opinion, the Gemara changes the second case of the Braisa here. So Ravina says, read the Braisa as follows. Eimeh. So the first case is like we said before. If before there was a Gemar din, Ibra v'yolda, it both became pregnant and it gave birth. So at the time of the goring and at the time of the Gemar din, it was not pregnant or did not give birth. It was in between. Then Vlada mutter. Then the Vlad is mutter, like we said before. Now, what's the pshat in the second case of the Braisa? We'll say as follows: Ibra. Before the Gemar din, it already became pregnant. So not like we said before that it became pregnant after the Gemar din. Before the Gemar din, it became pregnant, and then Mishanigmar Dina Yalda. Then it gives birth after the Gemar din. So at the time of the Gemar din, the baby was already in the mother's womb. Then Vlada Aser. So then, even according to this opinion of Zev v'zeh goyrem, the baby that's born will be Aser, and the reason is, and that's the basis b'chlal of this Braisa here, Ubar Yerach Imayhu. The fetus is like a thigh, like a limb of the mother. So if at the time of the Gemar din the mother was already pregnant with this baby, so then the baby will be Aser when it's born. Going back to the Mishnah, it said Kol Chayve Misis, that all the different categories of chayve mises, if they were mixed with one another, so what misa do you give them? You give the lighter misa amongst them. So it says the Gemara, Shma Mina, from this I could learn out that musre l'dava chamor, when one gets a warning, and he gets a warning for a harsher, a higher level of an aveda, and a higher misa, have a musre l'dava kal. This is also considered, it qualifies as a warning for a lighter misa. Because if you hear you saying you're going to give them all the lighter misa, but they weren't warned for that. At the time of the Asra, they were warned that they're going to get skila. So even though they were warned for a different misa, it qualifies that it's included in it, that it's already also a hasra for this lighter misa, and that's why you give the lighter misa. But Rabbi Yirmiyah said, no, there's no proof from here. Because in our Mishnah, that giving the lighter misa, you could say what it's talking about is kagan shehisru by stam. He wasn't warned with a specific misa that you'll get skila, sreifa. It was just a warning that of misa stam, without specifying. The question is, could you give such asra? Is such a asra qualify? So he says, V'hai Tane, what our Mishnah follows this opinion. It's a machlokes about this. We had it earlier in the Masechta. The Tanya, it says in the Braisa, Ushar chayve misas shebetayre, all the chayve misas that the Torah says, Eim misa noisam, we don't give them a misa, ela be'eda, you have to have a proper bezdin, which is the 23, and ve'edim, you have to have 2 witnesses, and also v'hasra, and you also have to have a proper warning. And now what does that include? V'ad shiyoidiyu shu chayiv misas bezdin. You have to let him know that it's going to be chayiv misas bezdin if he does this aveda. But you do not have to specify which misa it is. However, Rabbi Yehuda says, ad shiyoidiyu be'eze misa hu nerag. You have to let him know specifically which misa it is that is going to be killed. and only then does the hasra qualify. So our Mishnah is following the Tanakama that says that you can give a hasra stam, and that's good enough. And therefore, in this case, the person that got the hasra stam accepted the hasra that he'll be killed in any misa. So you can give him a lighter misa, even though he was chayav the harsher misa. Now the Gemara explains the source of this machlokes, whether you have to specify which misa it will be when you give the warning. Tanakama yalef and mekaishish. The Tanakama learns out from what it says by the mekaishish eitzim. So there, what is the story with the mekaishish eitzim? After he was machal Shabbos, so it wasn't clear which misa is chayiv, and he was put into imprisonment until they'll find out which misa is chayiv. So if you see later that they didn't even know which misa machal Shabbos is chayiv, it must be that the warning was for a misa stam. They didn't specify which misa it is, and they were able to give him skila. Rabbi Yehuda says, Mekaishish hayras shah haysa. The case of the Mekaishish, that they gave him misa even without specifying which misa it is, that was something that was just for that time. Al Pia Dibur, the Eibshter said there's going to be chayiv misa. But you can't learn out L'daitis from there. Because L'daitis, it's learned out, the fact that you have to give asra is learned out from Yumas Hameis, and Yumas Hameis, the Gemara brought before in the Masechta, the source, and it's mashma that you have to be mati yourself, you have to accept the asra specifically for that misa that we're going to give the person. So therefore you can't learn from the Mekaishish, it's a Yirashah. Going back to the Mishnah, it said, Haniskolim bin Nisrafim. If you have those that are chayiv skila that were mixed in with the Nisrafim. So in such a case, the Mishnah brought a machlokes of Rab Shimon and the Rabbanon, which misa is harsher. Skila or Sreifa. According to Rab Shimon, Sreifa is the harsher misa, and therefore in such a case when it's mixed, you give skila. And the Rabbanan say the opposite. So now the Gemara brings that Masnilo, Rav Yecheskel, L'Rami Berei, when Rav Yecheskel learned this Mishnah, so he taught this Mishnah to Rami his son, and he switched the order. In our Mishnah it said, Haniskolin bin Nisrafim, that the Niskolin were mixed in amongst the Nisrafim. What's that? What's mashma here if you use that term of Niskolin bin Nisrafim? It's mashma that there's more Nisrafim and there's a few Niskolin that are mixed into the Nisrafim. But he taught the opposite. He taught Hanisrafin bin Niskolin, that the Nisrafin, they were mixed into the Niskolin. And in other words, the Roiv, the majority, was the Niskolin, and there was a few Nisrafim that got mixed into the Niskolin. And on that, he taught the Mishnah that Rav Shimon Oimi Yadaynu b'skila, that you're going to have to give skila. Why? Shasreifa chamura, since Sreifa is harsher, so you have to give the lighter one, which is skila. That's how Rabbi Cheskel taught it to his son. Amalei, Rav Yehuda, which was another son, said to his father, Abba, my father, leitisnei hachi, don't teach the Mishnah the way you taught it. Because if the case over here is the way you're saying it, that the majority of the people that are mixed in this crowd are the ones that are chayiv skila, so then my area, the Sreifa chamura. Why would you have to say that the reason why you give the punishment of skila is because you can't give sreifa? Sreifa is too harsh. Typically, the Reuben is skalaninu. You can give another reason, a simpler reason, that it's because most of them are the ones that are chayiv skila, and you follow the majority. So Eloi says, therefore, read the Mishnah as we have it, as our Mishnah is, Hachi Esnei, Haniskalin ben Nisrafim, that the ones that are chayiv skila were mixed in with the ones that are in the Nisrafim, and they are the ones that are in the Nisrafim are the majority. And the Mishnah over here is saying that you're going to have to give the punishment of skila, because skila is the lighter misa, even though the ones that are chayiv sreifa are the roiv. That's the chiddush of our Mishnah. So it's Adamus is that Taisvis asks the question on this. I don't think the Taisvis is here. It's in another place in Shas. Taisvis asks the question, so why taka don't you follow roiv? If the ones that are chayiv sreifa are the roiv, even though it's the harsher misa, but you should follow roiv. So in one pshat, Taisva says you're going to have to say that the pshat in this Gemara over here is that when these people got mixed in together, we're talking about a situation where you can't follow roiv. Why? Based on what we learned yesterday, then in such a case we say kol kavua kemechza mechzadami. When you have a crowd of people and there's one mixed into them, and it's not a situation where one separates from a crowd, but it's just a crowd of people that are mixed together, there is no din of roiv. Adarabah, we just say that it's like half and half, so you can't say roiv. And according to this, even before, when the Gemara said that why are you saying that you're going to give sreifa because that's the lighter one, you should say roiv, it doesn't really mean roiv. It means if it's half and half, so then you're not going to give the harsher misa. You're going to give, if it's half and half, you're going to give the lighter misa. So it should have said that the reason is because kol kavua kamechza al mechza. That's really what the Gemara means to say. That's according to one pshat that Taisva says. This is a Taisva I believe in Zvachim. Okay, Akopana the Gemara goes on to say, so we read the Mishnah the way we have it, that Niskalin is ben Israfim, the majority are the ones that are chayiv sreife, and Rab Shimon Oime. And still, although the majority is sreife, Rab Shimon says, Yedainu b'skile, you give the punishment, the lighter one, which is skile, shas sreife chamura, because sreife is more stringent. That's how you read our Mishnah. The Gemara asks on this, if that's the case, ihachi aim seifa. So then how are you going to understand what Chachamim is saying when Chachamim respond to this? Chachamim say, Yedainu b'sreife, that in such a case you give sreife. Why? Sha'skila chamura. Because skill is the harsher misa, so you have to give the lighter one, which is sreife. But according to what you said, that the majority of the people here are chayiv sreife, typically the Ruben Israfim. Nino. Why do you have to say that the reason is that you give sreifa? Because according to the Rabbanan, that's the lighter misa. But Raiv of the people here are chayiv sreifa, or at least, like I mentioned, Taisa says, Kol kavua kamechza al mechza, so you should give sreifa. So the Gemara answers, you're right, over here, Hasam Rabbanan hu the Ka'amru lei le Rab Shimon. It's over here, it's just one point that the Rabbanan are coming to argue on the reasoning that Rab Shimon said. Ledidach, the Amrit, sreifa chamura. According to your reasoning that you're saying that sreifa is the harsher one, that reasoning is not true. Skila chamura. Skila is harsher. But be'emes, according to the Rabbanan, the reason that you give sreifa is because the majority is sreifa here. You don't need any other reason. Okay. This was the discussion between Rav Yecheskel and his two sons. He had one son, Rami, and he had another son, Rav Yehuda, and his son, Rav Yehuda, told his father, don't learn the Mishnah this way. So on this, the Gemara says, Amalei Shmuel Rav Yehuda, Shmuel, when he heard how his son spoke to his father, so he said to his son Rav Yehuda, Shinana, sharp one. This is always the way he referred to him. You should not speak to your father this way and tell him clearly that he made a mistake, and you're embarrassing him and causing him pain by speaking this way. The Tanya, because we learned in the Braisa, even in a case, not only when you make a mistake in learning, but even in a case where one sees his father doing something against Torah, he should not say to his father, Abba avartal divrei Torah. Father, you're going against the Torah. Now let us say that. Ella, rather, what does he say? Abba kach ksiv b'Torah. You tell him, Father, this is what it says in the Torah, and he'll understand that he's being over on what it says in the Torah. But the Gemara says, the Gemara doesn't accept this either. Sof, even if you use this term, even if you're going to use this term, hainu hach, it's the exact same thing. Okay, I'm looking here in Rashi. It seems like from Rashi that it's all part of one big question over here. The Gemara, the Gemara is saying over here with the Tmiyah. You shouldn't say to him, Avartal divrei Torah. So what? Elo, Aimaloi, Abba kach ksiv b'Torah. You're going to tell him, Father, this is what it says in the Torah. Sof, hainu hach. In the end of the day, it's the same thing. He's going to be embarrassed by the fact that you're pointing out the mistake that he made. So Eloi Meloi, rather, what you say to the father is Abba Mikra Kosev B'Torah Kach. All you say is you just quote the pasuk in the Torah. You don't address the father to say this is what it says in the Torah by pointing out his mistake. You just read the pasuk of what it says in the Torah, and he'll understand on his own the mistake that he made. And the same thing over here. Rav Yehuda could have addressed his father and said to his father just a point, and his father would have already understood everything on his own. That's the halacha of kibbud av v'eim.